Hey y'all, I'm Ella Darby. I'm your PLA for Intro to Biochemistry, taught by Dr. Robinson, and this video is going to focus on the G3P shuttle and the Malate Aspartate shuttle. And understanding these shuttles is going to be key when you want to address the learning outcomes, asking you to be able to identify locations of metabolic processes in the cell and calculating ATP production. So let's begin with the purpose of the shuttles. These shuttles are going to transport electron carriers NADH and FADH2 to the inner mitochondrial membrane to enter the ETC. The ETC powers the proton motive force, which powers ATP synthase, which is how we make ATP. These electron carriers are our main source for ATP from glucose metabolism. So take a moment to try and recall the steps to glucose metabolism: glycolysis, the PDH complex, the citric acid cycle, and the ETC. These first three steps all produce electron carriers for the ETC. Now try and recall how many electron carriers each of these steps produce. So glycolysis and the PDH complex both produce 2 NADH, and the citric acid cycle is going to produce 6 NADH and 2 FADH2. And when you're doing your ATP calculations, typically NADH is equivalent to 2.5 ATP and FADH2 is equivalent to 1.5 ATP. So here's where those shuttles become important. So you can see here, this is the electron transport chain, and it takes place where? In the inner mitochondrial membrane. Here's the PDH complex and the citric acid cycle, and they're both taking place where? The mitochondrial matrix. So their electron carriers can both flow freely to their complexes in the ETC. But glycolysis is all the way out here, outside the mitochondria. So its electron carriers that are produced are large molecules that cannot passively pass through the membrane. So we have these shuttles to pass the electrons, not the carrier itself, but the electrons, through the membrane to the ETC. So let's start with the malate aspartate shuttle. So NADH is going to pass its electrons to oxaloacetate, oxidizing it to NADH and reducing oxaloacetate to malate. Malate is going to flow through the inner mitochondrial membrane, where it's oxidized to oxaloacetate, passing those electrons to a NAD plus molecule, which reduces it back to NADH. Now, where does NADH pass its electrons to? Passes it to complex 1, producing 2.5 ATP. Now, the G3P shuttle is going to pass NADH to dihydroxyacetone phosphate, reducing dihydroxyacetone phosphate to G3P and oxidizing NADH to NAD+. So this enzyme here is bound to the inner mitochondrial membrane. So G3P is going to use that to pass its electrons to a FAD molecule, oxidizing G3P back to hydroxyacetone phosphate, reducing FAD to FADH2. And because this enzyme is bound to the inner mitochondrial membrane, FADH2 can go ahead and pass those electrons where? Complex 2, producing 1.5 ATP. So to practice this concept, I encourage you to do a couple calculations. One that's going to assume that the electron carriers from glycolysis are going to use the G3P shuttle, and one assuming that the electron carriers from glycolysis are going to use the malate aspartate shuttle. And whatever value you get from that calculation, go ahead and check with me or Dr. Robinson to make sure you understand this concept. So thank you for watching. I hope it was helpful.